Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Peyton's Playbook. This week we are going to be recapping week 3 of college football, the highs, the lows, the significant wins that some of these teams had to get them into that conversation, and then of course some major injuries that occurred, especially to the quarterback Quinn Ewers for Texas. So lots to talk about. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and let's get this episode started. So like I said, on today's episode, we are recapping week 3 of college football as we look ahead into week 4. You had some significant injuries, especially to the quarterback for Texas. You have the quarterback of Wisconsin that also got injured. That was a season-ending injury for him. Luckily for Texas, it sounds like Quinn Ewers is only going to miss this coming week in week 4. So that's good news. But we have to talk about Arch Manning, right? You can't talk about week 3 without talking about the Texas game, and they absolutely destroyed their opponent 56-7 against UTSA. And this happened pretty much with Arch Manning on the field. You had Quinn Ewers go out in the second quarter with kind of a non-contact abdominal injury. The first play in the game for Arch Manning, a 19-yard touchdown pass, and it was only up from there. He had 5 touchdowns in this game, and that included a 67-yard touchdown where his speed hit about 21 miles per hour. That is fast. That's not just fast. That is fast, especially for a quarterback. So Arch Manning had a statement game, especially being that backup quarterback for Texas. You know, he wants to come in here and prove that he's going to be there for Texas, especially in a situation where their number one quarterback goes out. And I think what's going to happen for a lot of the conversation in the media is you're going to say Arch Manning is going to replace QB1 Quinn Ewers. I do not think that's the case. All that Arch Manning proved to me was he is a very talented athlete. I mean, almost 21 miles per hour. And he solidified for the Texas fan base, for the coaching staff, that this team is going to be good after Quinn Ewers leave. They have a solid offensive line, defensive line, a good group of wide receivers, and now you have a backup quarterback that you know you can count on if something like what happened this week happens to your QB1 Quinn Ewers. Another thing, Quinn Ewers to me is going to be in New York for that Heisman ceremony regardless. I know if you looked at the bets recently, Arch Manning's kind of Heisman stock raised. And I think, yes, he is a great quarterback. And if, so to say, Quinn Ewers was out for the season, that could happen. But to me, Quinn Ewers is in that Heisman conversation still. He's going to miss 1 game, 1.5 games, I think. So I still have QB1 being Quinn Ewers. But Texas is outright dominating the football game right now. And that is why they replaced Georgia was number 1 last week. They got into that number 1 spot this week. Again, 56-7 against UTSA. Now, another team that really stood out to me in week 3 was Oregon. Welcome to the club, Oregon. After 2 very uninspiring wins in the first 2 weeks of college football. Again, they still won the game. They're 3-0. But this was the first kind of statement game that I had seen from them this season. They played Oregon State 49-14. Dillon Gabriel, 291 yards, 2 touchdowns. It was just a reassuring performance for me watching the game. And I think for a lot of Oregon fans that, okay, Oregon's had these very close games, some games they should have probably blown out the opponent. But this was just a reassuring win for me. I think Oregon's still in that conversation. They're not, in that top 5 conversation right now. But I think we look ahead to week 4. I'm excited to see what this Oregon team can do, and hopefully they continue to show up like they showed up against Oregon State. As for Georgia, like I said, Texas took the number 1 spot in the AP Top 25. Georgia had a kind of, if you were a Georgia Bulldog fan, against Kentucky, they've always struggled, right? So you knew this may be kind of a game that they were going to struggle in, but 13-12, Georgia did end up pulling out that win. but it wasn't a performance to stay in that number one spot. It was closer than expected. Again, it's Georgia. They seem to do this all the time, but they have a bye week coming up in week 4, which will be good. And then they will be playing Texas next week. So it's kind of good they have a bye week. They're going to practice. And Joel Klatt said this perfectly. It could have been, and I'm going to take this, that Kentucky really prepared for this game. They were coming off a major loss at home to South Carolina. And Georgia may not have prepared, right? You still college athletes. This is exactly what Joel Klatt was saying. Georgia may have just not prepared well enough for this game, and you knew Kentucky was going to prepare for this game, especially coming off that loss at home. Again, Georgia took the win, so you're still, as a Georgia Bulldog fan, you're still okay, right? You haven't gotten that loss yet, but it was just a closer game than I think a lot of fans were expecting, and that is why they dropped to back away from that number one position. And I'm completely for Texas taking that. I said in last week's podcast, I believe that Texas, if they could continue showing out, especially with that backup quarterback, Arch Manning, they were going to be number one. So then you have kind of just going through, you have the Alabama-Wisconsin game. Alabama won that game, again, dominating on offense, defense, 42-10. The bummer and what stood out to me this game wasn't Alabama. The quarterback for Wisconsin, Tyler Van Dyke, will now miss the remainder of the season due to an injury that occurred in that game. So that's a big kind of thing that happened with Wisconsin. We're going to have to see kind of where that takes them. When your number one quarterback goes down, it's never good, especially in college football when, the Texas thing, having Arch Manning stepping up like that is very rare, right? So that's a bummer for Wisconsin, but you have Alabama still won that game 42-10. You had 5 touchdowns by Jalen Monroe. Again, they have that bye next week. So Alabama's doing great for me. They're not in that number one spot conversation. I still think Texas is continuing to prove to be just a little better than those teams. Again, we are heading into a lot more of conference play, so you're going to see a lot more teams, kind of closer games, not these huge blowout games where you're paying someone to play them. So it's going to be now week 4 coming up. You're going to see a lot more changes. I think a lot more shuffling in that AP top 25. Speaking of playing someone and paying them, you had Notre Dame last week. Oh boy, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, and they paid them to play that game. So after winning week 1 to Texas A&M, great win, they then lost to Northern Illinois. Well, they came back. They had their statement game. They knew they were not going down for the season. They went to Purdue 66-7. So again, they bounced back after that Northern Illinois loss, which was good. It kind of reassured the Notre Dame fans that it's okay. It might have been a weird game you played last week against Northern Illinois, but I'm still iffy on what Notre Dame is going to do. Again, 66-7 is a huge blowout, right? That's a big game for them, a good statement game that they got to come back. But heading into this kind of next couple weeks, I don't know where Notre Dame stands, right? I have to see what they're going to play. Are they going to continue to be that up and down team, right? That won't get you into that top 12 conversation, but there's still hope, right, for a future season. I have to kind of see what happens in terms of that. They had 3 rushing touchdowns, though, by their quarterback. So it was a good game for Notre Dame, right? I'm going to give them credit. They bounced back after that kind of terrible loss last week. So I'm going to give Notre Dame credit. We're going to have to see what they do after this week. Then you have Nebraska. If you watched my last video, I had a hot take, right? I think Nebraska can be a number 10 team this year in that top 10 rankings. I do. I think they have their freshman quarterback, Dylan Raiola. I think they are clicking on both sides of the ball. I want to know what you guys think. Am I completely off on this? Obviously, they have a tough schedule coming up, so it's kind of like, all right, take it with a grain of salt. But if Nebraska keeps showing up like they have been in these past 3 weeks, they won 34-3 against Northern Iowa. Remember, they also beat the Buffs last week. I think they can be in the top 10. I do. Now then, maybe when they go play, they get to that top 10 and they fall right out of it, right? As you get into these tougher teams you're playing. But I do have them being a top 10 team. This is the best start since 2016 for Nebraska. Again, they're under head coach Matt Rule. It's their best start since 2016. So I'm giving them credit, and that is hard to say as a Buffs fan, but I I think Nebraska has something there, whether it's going to be this season or next season. Something is clicking. And again, they have that freshman quarterback, Dylan Raiola. So that's helping them as well, right? Dylan Raiola scored on 5 of his first 6 possessions, 2 touchdowns, 247 yards. So this kid, again, you have the memes comparing him to Patrick Mahomes, his pregame warm-up, his look, right? But I think he is a great player. Again, he's young still, which helps Nebraska. But again, Nebraska's been dominating their opponents this week, 34-3 against Northern Iowa. And then you head to LSU, South Carolina, and boy, I'm really hoping LSU can do something this season, right? They have a huge fan base. I'm hoping to see something, and nothing's really there. LSU ended up winning the game 36-33 against South Carolina, but South Carolina led 24-10 at one point. So major comeback by LSU. I will give them that. It's just nothing. They're not showing me that they belong in that top 12 right now. Great team. It's just to be that close to South Carolina when I think they were 7.5-point favorites to win that game. I just think they're not showing me that they're completely in that top 12 week. You can't question their resilience, though. I mean, being down 24-10 and then coming back and winning the game, clearly you can't question the resilience of the coaches, of those athletes. But you can't question the defense. You can question the South Carolina had gains of 75, 66, 39, 31, and 27 yards. So clearly their defense has some struggles they're working on. Their offense entered the red zone 7 times, but only scored 4 touchdowns. So you have some questions on the offense, questions on the defense. Can't question resilience. No, I mean, to come back from being down 14 points is great, but there's a lot of questions surrounding this football team, and we're just going to have to see how they're going to continue to respond. I mean, you keep winning, if you are showing, it may be close games, but you keep winning, are you going to jump ahead into someone who is dominating a football game, right? Like Nebraska, for example. Nebraska is dominating football games. We're going to have to see heading into week 4 how that's going to work. Like I said, you had Oregon State finally showed up against Oregon State. Hopefully they can carry that into week 4. And then you have, I believe, the most dominating game this week that I kind of was looking at. You have Tennessee, Kansas State, 71-0. 65 points scored by Tennessee in the halftime. Again, first week I did this podcast, I talked about their quarterback. I think Tennessee is just kind of getting started. I think they are going to be a team to beat this year. And 71-0, I mean, that is mind-blowing, right? Especially 65 points by halftime. That is 30 minutes, you scored 65 points. That's giving the ball back. That's, they're clicking on defense. They're clicking on offense. I mean, to score 65 points by halftime is unheard of. Really, it's crazy to me. They've outscored their opponents also 191-13 during these past 3 weeks. 191-13. That means they've let 1 touchdown basically be scored in 3 weeks of college football. So Tennessee is, I think for me, is going to be in that top 12, top 10 ranking as we continue to go into this coming week. I think they're going to be in that playoff contention for me. They're dominating both sides of the football right now. And again, 71-0 against Kansas State. That's a team. Them and Texas. I mean, those are the 2 teams my eyes are on. My eyes are also on Miami and Nebraska. Those are the 4 teams I'm looking. You have Alabama, Georgia, these teams that are always really good, right? But to have that, pure domination is what I am looking for as we head into week 4. Then you have Oklahoma, 34-19 against Tulane. Michigan's kind of been struggling lately, right? Last week they lost to Texas, 31-12. So this week they won 28-18 against Arkansas. To me, it's just inconsistent quarterback play. They are struggling on so many things of the football, each side of the football right now. But the main thing is the quarterback inconsistencies. 3 interception passes, so that's 6 in total for the season for their quarterback. I believe now Michigan has announced their now bringing in their other quarterback to start this coming week. But Michigan's they've just been struggling, right? You have this national title defending team, and you thought they're going to be good this season. Obviously, you lost JJ McCarthy, but their team was good all around last year. It wasn't, you can't say it was just JJ McCarthy. Their offense was clicking, their defense was clicking, their wide receivers, they had a solid core group. Everything was working, especially with, the controversy going around that team. Everything, the coaching staff was working, and now it's just inconsistency after inconsistency, interception, losing, winning. They're just all over the place. So we're going to have to see kind of what happens as we go further down the season. But right now, they're just not consistent enough for me to be in that top 5 conversation. You have Utah State. Utah won that game again, rival game, in-state game, 38-21. Cam Rising, however, did not play. He was hurt in that game against Baylor last week, so he did not play. They still ended up pulling out the win with their backup quarterback. But it's kind of, again, you don't know where to stand with Utah quite yet. Your star quarterback is hurt right now. They won the game. Luckily, that was a rival game. You want to win those games, of course, against Utah State. But I just don't know where to yet stand with them with kind of the injuries happening and where they're heading this year. And like I said, I compared the Tennessee to Kansas State 71-0. The other team I'm watching is Miami, 62-0 against Ball State. Cam Ward continues to light up the field. 5 touchdowns this game. Miami is that team for me to watch. You have Tennessee and Miami. That's who I'm keeping my eyes on. Both are dominating the game. Both are blowing out there. It's not just like, 10, 14 points, 62-0. Cam Ward to me is a phenomenal athlete. So I'm watching that team as we head into week 4. Ohio State, obviously they had a bye week, so not much to talk about there. Again, they're still in those rankings. Then you have the Ole Miss Wake Forest game, 40-6. They're one of only 2 teams in the NFL or in college football that haven't allowed a touchdown this season. So Ole Miss, again, they're up there in that conversation for you have that 12-team playoff this year. But to be one of only 2 teams that hasn't even allowed a touchdown is pretty impressive. The kind of controversy that surrounded this game is Wake Forest now refuses to play that final game in their contract agreement. So they were bought out, basically paid to go into 2025. So they have 1 game remaining that they need to play against Ole Miss. They've just bought it out. They don't want to get kind of blown out like this again. It's not worth it to them. Again, money isn't everything, right? So they've bought out that contract. So this will be the last matchup you will see against Wake Forest, 40-6. Then you have kind of just breaking everything down. You have Memphis 20-12 against Florida State. Well, Florida State is 0-3. Are we surprised? Yes. Are some people not surprised? Yes. Were ranked coming into the season, and now they're 0-3. I really don't know when they're going to win a football game. Let me know in the comments below, but this is kind of their schedule going into the season. They have Cal, then SMU, Clemson, Duke, Miami. You have Notre Dame, UNC, Florida. If Florida State goes 0 does not win a game really this season, maybe they'll have 1-2 wins. That will be shocking to me because they were this dumb. I mean, they were fighting last year to be in the top 4, to be in contention to win that championship. And of course, then you play Georgia and you get blown out. But those games, the athletes sitting because they're getting drafted, don't want to get injured. The fact they're 0-3 is, I think that's the biggest surprise to a lot of people in this kind of college football season as we've gotten going, is seeing how different that team is. Obviously, you have Michigan, who is struggling and inconsistent, but to be 0-3 is a whole different story, right? Then you talk about kind of to be ranked and to fully drop out of being ranked, I should say. The last time this happened with 0-3 starts, being in the top 10, You had Penn State in 2020, and then you had Texas A&M in 1988. So this is hardly ever happens, right? It's very rare that you have so much turnover in your team that this happens. Again, it's all new with the transfer portal. You have athletes on every team transferring in, transferring out. Nothing is consistent. I will give Nebraska credit on that one. They have figured out how to kind of keep their players this season. So again, it's just the fact you're 0-3 definitely says something on maybe a lot of it was their quarterback last year. I don't know if there's just a lot of inconsistency, if just something happened, just it's like something switched the minute they didn't get into that top four. And then the last game we want to talk about, of course, is the Buffs. The Buffs played the CSU Rams. It was the Rocky Mountain Showdown. It was in Fort Collins at CSU's home stadium. Buffs won. It was a great game. I think a lot of Buffs fans, including myself, were really nervous about that game. It was a game CU needed to win after being kind of blown out by Nebraska, barely getting by in the first week against North Dakota State. This was a must-need win for CU, especially now they head back home this week for homecoming, playing Baylor. And CU does not have an easy schedule going ahead, right? So this was a game they needed to win, and they proved that they can win. They proved they can run the ball. They proved their offensive line can work. Altogether, I think the Buffs completely showed out in this game. Again, it's that rival game, the Rocky Mountain Showdown, but Buffs won that game 28-9. Travis Hunter. We have to talk about Travis Hunter, one of the best players in college football, I believe, right now. He played 123 of 138 total plays, 13 catches for 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 5 tackles, and 1 pass breakup. This kid is in that top 10 Heisman conversation, if not top 5. Obviously, he's not playing for a team like Miami right now. Texas #1, but I think the fact he's playing almost 100% of snaps on this game is incredible. I think he deserves to be in that top 5 of that Heisman conversation because he's playing both sides of the ball. And then again, you have Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback for CU. He had a great game as well. 310 yards, 4 touchdowns. CU Buffs set the attendance record for CSU. Again, this game was played in Fort Collins with around 40,000 fans in attendance to watch this. And of course, I was in attendance to watch this, and I was so excited to finally see a good full game performance, 60-minute kind of performance by the Buffs on both sides of the ball. I mean, they were struggling on offensive line. I saw them show up. The run game finally showed up. I think they outran in total yards what they had run in the first 2 games of the season. But I think Buffs could potentially be great. They have a really tough schedule ahead of them. Right now, they sit at 2-1 with that loss to Nebraska. Baylor at home this week on homecoming week. This will be a big test to see where the Buffs can kind of go this season with that tough schedule ahead. Obviously, you had the controversy of the CSU Rams football players. You had 2 of them, their quarterback and then Torrey Horton, kind of come out with an interview with Romy Bean and just basically say, we should have murdered them last year because that game did go to double overtime. They're coming for revenge. See how far Instagram followers get them. And well, CU Buffs definitely play. They keep receipts, as they say. They came out and showed the Rams who they are and that there was no taking down the Buffs quite yet this season. So that was a big game. Buffs win, Nebraska wins, Texas wins. Lots happened. You had that injury to the Texas quarterback, injury to the Wisconsin quarterback. Lots more to come in week 4. Not as big of matchups. Again, you're starting conference play. This week, the top 3 games to watch for me are number 11, USC versus 18, Michigan. That's going to be a great game. Number 12, Utah versus number 14, Oklahoma State. And then you have ESPN's College Game Day heading to watch the game, Tennessee, who is ranked 6th versus number 15, Oklahoma. So big games kind of coming up this week. Big games for Michigan, especially, could kind of prove that maybe they can get their quarterback figured out. Little less inconsistencies. Texas, they're, I think, gonna stay right now in number one. Again, Georgia has a bye this week. So unless something major happens, I think Texas is gonna remain in that number one spot coming into week 4. But yeah, so that was kind of my recap. Those are the top 3 games to watch. Again, bus play this weekend, homecoming against Baylor at CU Folsom Stadium. Be sure you're watching that. Watch those top 3 games that I have for the week and a lot more predictions to come. But thank you for watching my week 3 of college football recap on Peyton's Playbook. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, leave comments down below on what you guys want to see, some football teams that you think are a must watch, and let me know what you guys think on the week heading into week 4 of college football. So thank you for joining me on Peyton's Playbook, and I will see you next time.